Thank you all for inviting me to give this presentation. Again, this is the second presentation of a series. The first part I gave 2 years ago. After I presented you the information 2 years ago, I went back to the United States and wrote a book about methanol and methanol poisoning and how it impacts the public health. I'm very concerned about methanol. Methanol is a very unusual chemical. It's a chemical that is toxic only to humans and not to any laboratory animal. So it can't be tested on animals. So my greatest concern, and the reason I have this concern, is I'm a food scientist, and I was very concerned when a company that was basically headed by Donald Rumsfeld insisted on introducing a sweetener about 27 years ago that major component was methyl alcohol. Methyl alcohol, again, cannot be tested on animals. It can only be tested on humans. And we're going to see, I'm going to show you a little bit about what its effects can be. My major concern is methyl alcohol, the symptoms of that methyl alcohol poisoning are identical in every way to the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. They cannot be differentiated. And so we're going to look at that today a little bit, and going to try to convince you that you should stop consuming methyl alcohol. Everything you need to learn about this is free on my website, including that chapter, and including a list of the few foods, a handful of foods, that you just avoid to stop consuming methyl alcohol. It's pretty straightforward. Now this, a little bit of a review from last time. When did MS start? You know, we don't see any reference to MS in the Bible. We don't see any reference to MS in older medical texts. We don't see any reference to MS in dated literature of any country in the world until deep into the 1800s. Okay, it's not an ancient malady, and you say, well, maybe it was just overlooked. Well, you can't overlook multiple sclerosis. The final stages of multiple sclerosis are, onto itself, very definable. And it'd be impossible to overlook them. So, it was unknown until sometime after Nicholas Alpert of France invented canning. So in 1807, Alpert invented the canning process. He invented it for Napoleon to help feed his troops during the war. And so we don't see MS appearing until after that. The initial years of the canning, they would only can meats and fish and that kind of product. And that canning of these products is not conducive to methanol production. You know, it's fruits and vegetables that are the material, the food material, that when canned, when placed in a sealed container, over a period of time, will generate methyl alcohol. So, the first identifiable instance of MS was not until around 1822, and a grandson of King George probably developed MS. His diary reads like the diary of a person who was developing MS, and that's how they brought those two things together. That's not particularly scientific, but in illustrations, medical illustrations, drawings done by Cardwell in 1831, we see the classic plaque formation of multiple sclerosis, and that's important. MS was first described in detail, but as a rare disease in 1865. This is interesting that Sherratt would find this disease. He was the head of the Salpeter Institute, where he had basically all the patients in France that developed neurological disorders would be sent there. And so he had a view of thousands and thousands of patients during his lifetime, and he first started seeing MS in one of his servants, a woman, and there's a picture of him leaning over a sink with a top hat on and a big plastic apron, and he's running his fingers through the raw brain of this woman. And what he's feeling for sclerosis. He's feeling for a roughness, a leathery material in the brain itself. We don't do this anymore with tissue, which is a shame, because what made the plaque, what gave it that consistency? And basically what I'm saying is, what gave it that consistency is the same chemical we use to give leather its consistency, formaldehyde. Methanol turns to formaldehyde within the blood-brain barrier of the person with multiple sclerosis. Okay, it continued to be an uncommon disease in the 1890s. After 1890s, it became a common disease with variable frequency until the increase that started with the introduction of 951. When you're looking at your labels, when you're looking for products to avoid, 951, aspartame, NutraSweet, Equal. That product contains 11% methyl alcohol. You have to avoid that. And you have to avoid some other things that are going to be near and dear to your heart. We call it the last 30 years epidemic. Because in the literature, if you read the original literature, it says, well, in the last 30 years, we've seen a tremendous increase in multiple sclerosis or certain other diseases. In the book, I talk about other diseases. But the disease that I'm concerned with most is multiple sclerosis, because I feel like I can make an impact with people with multiple sclerosis. We can, I believe, just stop the disease now, today. Everybody in this room who has MS, I believe it can be stopped today just by obeying some simple dietary avoidances, which are listed in my, again, free in the chapter, and on my website as well. Okay, I'm just have to go through this a little faster, I guess.
There's some cheese out here if you want.
Yeah,
There's a big statement there.
Oh, hi. You okay? Well, it's going backwards real well.
Standing room only.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about this. We didn't think there were going to be that many people. Okay, so what happened in the late 1800s? This is the one slide. If you take a look at the first DVD, which the Society has some copies of, I'll be glad to give to you. I had this slide on the screen, and I never explained it, so I'm going to explain it this time. Okay, what happened? Why did methanol consumption increase, and therefore MS increase, during this period of time? And just list a few simple things. The use of methanol for heating in Paris replacing wood. Instead of bringing wood into the homes in Paris, they would take the wood, they would heat it in a retort, and they would generate a liquid from that wood, an alcohol, that they could burn in a much simpler stove, and it was much cleaner to burn. That was methyl alcohol. That's wood alcohol. That's what we're talking about. So we're starting to see methyl alcohol getting into the home. We're starting to see it get into industry. It's a beautiful solvent, one of the best solvents available. So we started seeing that happening. Machine-rolled cigarettes. We developed machine-rolled cigarettes, machines that would do that. So instead of people rolling their own cigarettes, which was unsightly, these cigarette rolling machines came along again later on in the latter part of the 1800s. The use of methanol as a solvent for fast-drying glues in the leather and shoe industry rose dramatically. So these are things that are going on. Home canning. This is the big one. And this is the most serious problem I have with MS patients in New Zealand. I've got a woman in Takaka who heard about this 3 years ago, and I worked with her personally to try to just get her off methyl alcohol. She's a farmer's wife. Okay. She spent most of her life canning and preserving fruits and vegetables, and that was a part of her diet, and that was something she has to give up. Okay, this is extremely serious. This was the origin of where the methanol came from. The methanol is released from pectin inside a sealed container at room temperature over time, and so it's vital that you understand that. Cans or jars, it doesn't matter. But that's the mistake we made. I'm a food scientist, and I'm looking back 200 years and saying, you know, oops, we made a mistake. It took us that long to figure that out.
No, I ask.
Yes?
I'm a farmer's wife with the fruit and that. Can I put in the freezer?
That's a great question. A farmer's wife, can she put in the freezer? Of course. This is what I'm trying to encourage people to do. Don't throw away fruits and vegetables, but do freezer preserves. And you can freezer preserve in a jar. That's fine, as long as you put it immediately into the freezer. Even though it's in a sealed container, at those low temperatures, no, you're not going to develop methyl alcohol. Very, very minute amounts. So definitely, I'm not saying anything against freezing.
So you could still use
Yeah.
that lid. I was just meaning put it in a different container
Nope,
altogether.
nope. Use the lid. Use the same thing.
So
Just keep
same
it
glass
in a freezer.
container.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But you,
Oh wow, so that's not so difficult.
see, good for you. That's
That's probably easier.
okay. So this increase in canning was not only because of the industry making a machine that could produce 1,000 cans an hour, but due to the fact that the bulk jar company in the United States developed jars that people could can food at home. Okay. And why were they doing this? Why were they canning food at home? They were canning food at home because people like to eat fruits and vegetables in the wintertime. And that was the only mechanism they had to do that. Why is multiple sclerosis a disease of colder climates? I've never been able to figure that out, but I figured it out. It's because those are the people that are eating canned fruits and vegetables. New Zealand it's epidemic. New Zealand, you consume more canned fruits and vegetables than anybody in the world except the Australians. And you've always had the highest incidence of multiple sclerosis except for Scotland. And Scotland has a bit higher than yours. They consume a lot of canned fruits and vegetables, but on top of that, they consume huge amounts of smoked foods that are smoked traditionally. And that smoke contains what? Methyl alcohol. So, interesting thing. The book goes into this in greater detail. I'm not going to belabor this, but just things you need to know.